Welcome to the Piergrossi podcast. That's me with my good friend, BJ Harden Jones.
Hey.
Great to have you with us. We've been talking about doing this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm happy that we made it happen. Everything happens in perfect divine timing and order, you know? Yeah. So
to be that way.
How long have you been working with the work, or when did you first come in contact with Byron Katie? When did you first become familiar or become aware of Byron Katie?
2007. And I remember that specifically. My son had just been born, Asher. He was just about a month and a half old, and my partner Aaron and I were hosting an event, open space event, and there was a woman who came to that gathering, and there was something I was complaining about. Money. I was complaining about, like I was saying, people with money, it makes them more greedy and something like that. And she just cut me off and she was like, stop. No. Money cannot make you what you are not. Anything in our lives can only make us what we are. And then she was like, I have something for you. And it was an open space gathering, which means the content was open for the participants to determine and to plan together. And so she offered a session during the gathering, introducing the work, I think partly inspired by the conversation that we had. And so I went, and at the time I had, a very young son. And so I didn't have a lot of focus or attention to give to it, but it just kind of stayed in the back of my mind for like maybe a year and a half or so. And once I had a little more spaciousness in my schedule, I cracked open a book, and then I was like, wow, this woman is speaking to me. And it was like one of those, it wasn't like she was teaching me, it was like a remembering, right? That kind of like when you get information that's like, I knew this, but I didn't quite know that I knew it. Like something is so true about what she's saying. Yeah.
And so what was it that really stood out to you about this work, which is actually called The Work? And there will definitely be some people listening who don't know who Byron Katie is or anything about her. Yeah. So maybe you could share who she is.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun because we're actually going to be establishing who two people are, which is rare. Byron Katie and you, and maybe even me.
Yeah. And maybe you.
And maybe even you, the listener.
Who are you? Who are you? Good question.
I was thinking about this because this is like the whole kind of paradox of the whole thing, right? It's like you're defining a story of who someone is and who I am. Like, who are you? And you tell the story of who you are. So I think as we go further here, we'll be inquiring into, there's the story, and is the story true, and so forth. But one step at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Byron Katie is a woman. She's alive today, so far as I know.
Last you checked.
As of a few days ago, I believe she was breathing. Yeah, so she has a story that's similar to Eckhart Tolle, and a lot of people know of him. They have similar stories where they had just this sort of like average life and reasonably successful in a lot of ways, but a lot of like depression, fear, anxiety, and then just like this downward spiral. They both had this like really parallel downward spiral that just like when they hit this bottom, something popped, something clicked, and they just like woke up. So yeah, Katie, the way she talks about it, It was in 1986 that she had this experience, that she woke up, the way she says it, she woke up to a different reality. And she had enough of a taste of it and enough of a desire to stay with that the way she says it is, it never left her. Yeah, it seems like I was going to say something else about that. Oh, about Eckhart Tolle. Yeah, so they're friends. The two of them are friends. And so what they say, one of the ways that they describe the similarities between what they point to is, what he points to is the what, and what she points to is the how. So the work of Byron Katie is a method. It's a process. It's meditative self-inquiry. And it consists of finding the stress, the disturbances in our lives, and then meditating on them to find our own truth. Because our stress, any stress in our lives, I mean, the way that I think of it is like, that's a disconnection in some way with my creator. And it's a way that I don't feel safe or loved or accepted, or, it's one of those sort of fundamental, like, baseline, okay, ways of being. Like, it's any stress in my life is it could be subtle or it could be extreme, some way that I feel out of place or not held or not safe. And so then I take those moments and those thoughts through inquiry. And it's like each place of stress can become a doorway to, like, I mean, sitting in the lap of the Divine Mother is one way that it comes to me to say right now. Like, that's an experience that I have. It's like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't know it was this good. It's a mystical path, basically. It's a way of discovering for ourselves the kindness of the universe.
Mm. And so then it's a process. It's the how.
Yeah.
And so then, what is the how? What is the process?
Yeah. So the process is specifically, as I said before, finding stress, finding a disturbance. And most often what we find, I'll find a moment of stress in my life from the past. Mm-hmm. So, and the past could even be 5 minutes ago, or it could be, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I find a moment of stress in my life. So let me see, I'll find one. Yeah, so for me, what just came was, or is, a situation from, let's say, maybe like 3 years ago. And I was sitting in my living room with a friend, and she said something that for me was sudden and surprising. And so I'm like sitting with that moment, like, I feel this sort of like jolt in my nervous system. So you find the moment, you find the situation, and then you allow the mind to speak in that moment. Mm-hmm. So, and one of the ways that I like to think about it is like, there's a hurt child, let's say, in that moment. And I let that one speak, because I could bring my sort of spiritual lens to it. I could bring my wise, compassionate, like, oh, she had something going on for her, and that could be what I say about the moment. But that's not what I'm looking at. What I want to make space for, like, I make space in my lap for that hurt child. What does the hurt child have to say? So in that moment, the hurt part of me, the mind says, she's lashing out. It's not fair. she's supposed to support me. Yeah, specifically in that moment, because I had an understanding of what we were doing, and I thought that we were on the same page of like, this is what we're going to do now. And then it felt to me as though she switched. She came at me in a way that we hadn't agreed upon. So yeah, so she's supposed to support me.
Would you feel comfortable sharing what was said to you?
Yeah, let's see.
Just because it could be helpful for people in their own experiences to kind of relate to it.
Yeah. Let me just see if I remember. I mean, it was several years ago now, but
could like paraphrase it.
Yeah. So going back to that situation, and it's really helpful that you asked that question, because it is really helpful to sit in that moment as clearly as I can remember it. I remember she said, "I'm angry." And then I have the sense that there was some accusation behind it. Like there was, "I'm angry because you are speaking to me."
Yeah.
You are. Yeah. So I don't know if these were exactly her words, but the flavor was like, "I'm angry because you're controlling me," or something like that.
Yeah. That's how you heard what she said.
Yeah, something like that.
I think there was a key word, even before we go further. You said something like, "I felt like she was supposed to." And I feel like that's always how these things start. It's
Absolutely.
like, this person is supposed to, they should. It's this whole thing of like, what's happening right now, or what this person, if it's words, what this person's saying right now is not what they're supposed to say, or not what they should say.
Absolutely.
So just wanted to point that out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it exactly. I mean, one of the sort of definitions that I often use of the work is coming to see the difference between my thoughts and reality. And when those two are in opposition, that's suffering. And that's all that suffering ever is. And so when I come to see the difference, and like, what's so crazy is we so often don't know the difference, right? And that's partly because we identify as the thinker, and so when I think I'm the one thinking, the thoughts that come, I take to be reality, So it's like the way that like I can be in a daydream and like lost in it, and like, oh, I'm remembering this thing or thinking about this thing. And then you say my name and oh, I popped back, right? I was in that daydream in a way that it seemed as though it was real, right? Which isn't a problem a lot of times. Like, it can be great to go into daydreams, but then it's like, oh, what about when my daydream is a nightmare? Do I know how to wake myself up and bring myself back to reality and go like, was that reality or was that my thinking? And like knowing the difference, again, like offers this profound gateway into reality, which is where the kindness and grace of the universe exists.
Yeah, and it's like you get attached, identified to a position that's connected to a thought or a belief or a perspective.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, like just kind of seeing how that, and it can happen in such a subtle way. And I want to get back to how we go through the work, but I think it's just, I was feeling this is a really important conversation right now, because it feels like we're getting increasingly polarized with ideas, polarized with attached with ideas. Like someone posted on Facebook, it was a couple months ago, a month or two ago, and they were saying something about, there was a question or it was a statement or something about, is there going to be a civil war between the liberals and the conservatives, I guess, the left and the right? And I was like, well, how would you even know who's on which side? Like, it's just an idea inside. I can't walk down the street and know who's like left or right, So it's like it's like we're having wars based on ideas that don't have anything to do with anything external that's happening. That I thought was really, what I think is really fascinating. You know, it's like we get an idea of I'm this, you know, I'm left, I'm right, and you're the enemy, you're the, you know, so
Right.
and it's like you're building all of these. It's like you said, you're building like a world, like you're you know, probably not consciously or intentionally, but you're building a world that seems real for you.
Yeah.
So maybe we can, as we go forward, maybe we can kind of explore like some things that are happening in the collective and questioning, you know, questioning everything. So,
Yeah.
okay. So yes, so there's this woman and you hear something of the effect of like, you're making me angry, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of a thing, which I'm very familiar with, that having that, you know, being communicated to me, or having that sense in myself of that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Right. And I have, which I think you've done some stuff with NDC too, right? Nonviolent communication. So I've immersed myself in that. So I think of it in that way too, of, yeah. So, okay. So she's thinking like, you're making me angry. And then you have these ideas that start running in your mind. That's not what she's supposed to be doing right now. She's supposed to be supporting me, essentially.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Let's continue.
Yeah. 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 So back to the process, just to recap again. So first is finding the disturbance, right? So I found that moment. And then also finding, in parallel, finding what the mind is saying in that moment, finding the thought. So I identified several, but I think let's go with, in that moment, she's supposed to support me. Yeah, she's supposed to support me. Yeah. So then once I have the concept, the belief, then the process is asking a series of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I have here, so this is like the formal process.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little card
Great.
that has the questions on it.
Nice.
The first question is it true? The second question, can you absolutely know that it's true? The third question is, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And the fourth question is, who would you be without the thought? And then after that, there's an opportunity to experience the opposite of the original statement. And it's called the turnaround. So I'll just walk us through that again.
Yep.
So I anchor myself in that situation. So in other words, I see myself in my living room, and there she is, and she's looking at me. Actually, she's facing me. I think her eyes are closed. That's what I see. So she's supposed to support me. And the first question is it true? So in finding the answer for number one and number two, the invitation is to find just a yes or a no. And this initiates the process of inquiry. It's like it takes us out of discussion, because it's no longer like yes because, or no but, or all of the extraneous I allow to be there for my process, but I get still enough to find just a yes or a no. And what often happens too is this process is done with a facilitator just to help hold the container. Yeah, so then my facilitator would say, she's supposed to support you, is it true? And then I would get still and check, is it true for me? Is what I'm looking for, yes or no? She's supposed to support me. No. So in that situation, for me, it's not true anymore. I think I have questioned that moment in the past, and I believe I have found a yes. And that's great. There's no right or wrong answer. It's honoring what's true for the one inquiring in the moment. So since I found I know, then I skip number 2, which is, can you absolutely know that it's true? And then I move to, how do you react? What happens when you believe the thought? So one of the ways I think of that question is like the thought is like a seed, like floating in on the wind, like a little dandelion seed, let's say. And when it's believed, it's like it's grabbed by the mind and then it plants it, you know? And so then when it's grabbed and planted, whoosh, what grows? And just watch what grows. So watch the impact of the thought. Watch the impact of believing the thought. So again, how do you react? What happens when you believe the thought? This is question 3. So I'm in that situation in the living room. She's supposed to support me. I immediately felt my face tingly and in my chest. I felt shocked. I felt surprised. I stopped breathing, or I started breathing really shallow, maybe. Yeah, it was a shock sensation, like a jolt. I felt scared. I felt unsafe. So one of the things that we often look to also is like, what's going on in the past and future in my mind in that moment, right? So what images of the past do I see, and what images of the future? And so images of the past are like, oh my gosh, she's doing this again, right?
Yeah.
So I see images of like, she's done this before, she's doing it again. And then the mind goes to, of course, she's going to do it again in the future. Right. This is who she is. And now I'm just like, this is who she is. And then it's on, you know, then it's like, it's war, you know, it's like, me against her. How could she do this? This is a delicate moment. We agreed to what was going to happen. She's betraying me, you know, so then it's like my ego is at odds with her once I've identified who she is in that moment, because I've placed her in past and future and I've said, this is who she is.
And I think that's a really big one in any kind of long-term relationships, is this thing of like, they're doing it again, you know, here we go again, you know, so it's like, and just to get that ingrained in your mind, and then it becomes this trigger point.
Yeah. And one of the pieces of this inquiry that's so powerful, I mean, for me, the whole thing is powerful, but just this simple noticing in that moment. So I'm looking at my friend in the chair, right? So let's say in that moment, I was looking at my actual friend in the chair. And as I was looking at her, I was also seeing her in the past and her in the future. So when I look at that past and that future and I believe them, like that's war. That's when war starts. Because that is when my identity gets more solid, and when her identity in my mind gets more solid, because I've made this timeline and I've made it real in my mind, because I see that image and I think it's true. And what's so helpful, so to come back to what I was going to point to, is like, in that moment, which one is her? If I can only choose one, there's like the her in the past, there's the her in the chair, and there's the her in the future, right? So there's 3, and maybe even more, because maybe I have multiple hers in the future and multiple hers in the past. Which one is her? There she is in the chair. And everything else in that moment is imagination, right? Which can be really challenging to the ego to claim that, because the ego has a stake in, no, that was her. She actually did that. And it's like, okay, she may have actually done that in the past, but the one you're looking at in your mind is that her, right? Because we think we can see past and we think we can see future. I mean, less, but we also think we can see future. You know, that's why like a car swerves in front of you. Like when I have that jolt response, I saw a future. I saw a future of a crash that I thought was real. That's what caused, right, the like jolt in my body. So coming to see, like, it may be true that she has done this before, but what am I looking at? Am I looking at reality, or am I looking at a mirror reality? And like, to me, that's so huge and profound, and like can really deconstruct all of the structure that creates identity.
So I was thinking about future when we imagine future, and what struck me as interesting is how we, and even if scientifically, when they, whatever the different field is, they model the future, they do, you know, these things where they project the future. We're modeling the future in our minds based on the patterns of the past. Mm-hmm. That's all we had. So we look at, this is what happened. You know, when someone swerves a car, there's an accident. Someone just swerved a car, there's probably going to be an accident. You know, so we have this pattern prediction. So it's like, this happened this way 100 times in the past, is going to happen this way 100 times. So then if that's all you have, then you're just kind of locked in that. That's kind of your reality that you're locked in. And then there's this kind of what, you know, people call like self-fulfilling prophecy, where you're just, that's all you can see. So then that becomes, you don't see the other possibilities around you. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that future and past are actually like the same thing, just like projected in a illusionary different direction.
Yeah.
So that's really fascinating. The other thing that really struck me is how do we, because we have a need for security. You know, we want to feel like there's a sense of security, like, okay, I know what's happening, I know what's going on. And so how do I feel secure with somebody? Generally is like, the way it's often done is, I know you, I know this is how you are, this is what you do, I label you. You know, it's almost like, I'm thinking of like, there's a jar on the shelf and it's like, I don't know what it is. Well, let's find out and put a label on it, you know? Okay, that's what it is. Yeah. So like, we do that with people. Like this guy's an asshole. This one's, you know, whatever it is, these different things, you know? And so I love how you're pointing to, but who's the one that's here present in the moment? Yeah. Because you can't put a label on that. You would have to pay attention.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what's really interesting to me about what you're saying is like, yeah, you can imagine this person in the past, you can imagine them in the future, but you can't imagine them in the present. You have to pay attention to really be here and be with them and just, you know, be present to what arises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that puts me in mind of, or what I hear in my mind now is like some of the sort of like FAQ, you know, frequently asked questions of like, when I'm telling about the work, like often at this point, a lot of people will say, yeah, but so are you just saying like, I should just be okay with everything?
Yeah.
And absolutely not. Right? Absolutely not. You know, if there's abuse in your life, you know, or like there's someone who you have experienced consistently, you know, interact with you in a way that doesn't feel right, you know, one of the ways that Katie says it is, then question any thought that would keep you in that situation. You know, why are you staying? Because there is an intelligence that naturally moves me away from harm. Right. And so, but then I don't have to, the I who I think I am doesn't have to be the one who's doing it. and it can be based on these ideas of the past, but I'm not lost in the past. It's reference material. It's there, it's on the shelf, but it's not who I think I am. And it's useful to know, this person has treated me this way several times, and I notice I move away from them.
Yeah, it is. And I think that what's important to acknowledge there is that this is just a fact of the universe. People change. In fact, everything is always changing every single second. So it's like, and it can go either way, where you could feel like you're in a healthy dynamic with somebody, and maybe you're just assuming it's like, whoa, actually something doesn't feel right here. Something needs to be addressed. Or it could be like, this person's an asshole, but they've made some shift in their consciousness, but you can't see it because you're still looking at the old person. You can't forgive and you can't open. So I think that's an important component here of like, yes, this is what's happened in the past, but what's happening now? And can you, it doesn't mean that I like what you're saying. Like, it doesn't mean that you just totally disregard everything that's ever happened and you just, ignore it or repress it or suppress it, but it's not what's happening now. So it's like having that information, but can you continue to look again and again, with fresh eyes?
Yeah. And like in relationships, with the kind of, people that we hang out with who like geek out on this stuff, where there is intimacy and maybe there has been, hurt in the past. What starts to happen and what can start to happen is like, like I can refer to something in the past, and I can go, so Brian, right now I'm feeling nervous. I am remembering that time that you said you were going to do this thing and then you did the other thing, so I can acknowledge I'm having this up in my system. And I'm like, I'm working to know that that's not who you are. And, maybe it would be really helpful to me right now to have some reassurance that, you're going to honor, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
So it becomes conscious, and it can become part of the fabric of the conversation too.
That's an important example, because I get it. Like, when people first kind of start feeling into this sort of thing, they can think it's like a denial of feelings, or denying. Exactly. But it's actually like the opposite. It's actually going truly, authentically, and sincerely and vulnerably into what is the feeling of the moment.
Exactly. Yes.
But then there's an important distinction that happens, right? Maybe talk a little about this of, I'm feeling angry. That's the truth of what's happening for me. I'm feeling angry. You made me angry. Now we get into a story where you may feel like you didn't make me angry. I may feel like you did make me angry. Now we're going to argue for an hour or two about, did you make me angry? Did you not make me angry? Yeah. And can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
The difference between the feeling and the story.
Sure. Yeah. So that's really potent. Being able to like do that is like really, advanced.
Especially when you're
right?
fired up,
Yeah. Right. Because the feeling itself is an indication that, to some extent, the thought is believed, So like, for instance, in that example, like, let's say, you did something that like, to me, in my mind, let me down before, like you said you were going to do a thing and you didn't do it, Well,
I like the idea too of like what you said of like feeling like someone doesn't support you.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting one, because I was thinking about that too, is like, depending on the label we have on somebody, like if I'm like, hey, you're my friend, you're supposed to support me. But if I don't think you're my friend, if you're just some random stranger, I might not have the same expectation on you. So it's just interesting how, like, we have the idea of who that person is. This is really big with like husband and wives and partners, and a lot of expectations are, this person's supposed to do this and supposed to do that. And they're supposed to make me feel happy. And all these things are supposed to do for me,
Right.
Children, if you have children or parents, the family dynamics,
Yeah.
So that's just really interesting how we label the person, and then with that label, we put these expectations on them of what they're supposed to do for us.
Yeah. Right. Which in any moment when I have an expectation of what someone is going to do, again, it's having confused my thought with reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I can have this thought of like, yeah, for instance, I wanted you to show up here at 10 o'clock on the Zoom call. I had that expectation.
Right.
If I get that confused with reality and you didn't show up at 10, then I start to experience, I experience that in my system.
Yeah.
When I'm able to see, I have that expectation, and let's say you didn't show up, I'm able to see the difference. I'm in reality and I'm aware of my thinking that would oppose reality, but I don't have to believe it. And I think that points to what you were speaking about before of having the expectation. Like I can still speak to, I can still point to in our relating. My memory is that we said we were going to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not lost in it because I'm not thinking that one in the past is me. And I'm not thinking that one in the past is you. I'm aware that it's thought, and I'm aware that I'm here now. And there can still be this refinement. I can still refer to it. So let's work this out. I had the expectation that you would be here at 10, and I noticed you didn't show up at 10. Mm-hmm. So how are we going to do this in the future? However it is we work this out.
This is really good. So there's a couple of things here. So one is, just so everyone's clear, I did show up at 10, but we're just using an example here.
Yeah, exactly. And you did.
But it's really good because it's like that case, there's an agreement that two people made, and then the other person's not honoring the agreement.
Yeah.
But what can happen, and this does happen to, I've seen this happen on both ends, is you get really worked up, like, oh, this bastard, they didn't show up. And it's like, if you get home, they're like, I'm so sorry, my mother died, it wasn't, it's like it's like we get these stories running of what's happening without actually knowing what's happening.
Right. Well, and what's so juicy to me about that, like for me, when inquiry is alive inside of me, like those are good moments. Those are golden moments. When I start being in those moments where like, oh my God, he rejected me, he abandoned me, he hates me, he doesn't respect me, like whatever meaning I make of if you're a minute late or whatever, that is so good because those are the moments that I bring to inquiry that deliver me through that doorway to show me more freedom, right? Those are what point me to the separation that I'm creating.
Mm-hmm. So much of our feelings are created by our beliefs or our stories about what's happening, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
the way that Katie says it is, emotions are the effect of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And often we become aware of the emotion first.
Yeah.
And that's because we think we're the one thinking, right? So we're blind to the thought because we think it's just what is, right? It's the belief. It's
right.
The belief.
It seems to be the
fabric of reality.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Are there any? The feeling is there to wake us up to it.
Got it. The feeling is there to wake us up to a belief system that's like discordant or out of alignment with reality.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Are there any feelings that are not based on beliefs or thinking?
So far as I can tell, no.
Mm-hmm.
So far as I can tell.
Sometimes someone might have a feeling and not know why. They might not know what the belief is that's triggering the feeling.
Right. And that's really common. Yeah. That's why we go through the inquiry process. It's like, ooh, what was that? What was that feeling? Let me sit with that.
Do you feel like sometimes people, because this is something I've been kind of looking at with some people, particularly actually more, I would say more generally, or it could be anybody, but more women, I find sometimes they're feeling something intense that's maybe kind of collective. It's not even like personal to them. Do you find that there's something that's it's not a personal thing, but maybe there's just a collective energy in the field there's a sadness in the collective energy, or there's
so it does seem as though that can happen. And as far as I can tell, it's a paradox, because it's as though I can experience the sadness of the collective, but the closer I get to the truth, it's really my projection of the collective, right? It's my world, and my sadness that I put out there, and I lose track of it, and it's so potent in my own journey of suffering, is like most of the suffering that I experience at this point, I do put out there, and I still experience it. Like that's where my suffering is quote unquote out there. Like I suffer on behalf of everyone else, and then I want everyone else to stop suffering. I have to take care of my suffering that I'm doing, thinking it's everyone else's suffering.
This is big. I mean, I feel because I've been thinking about this too, is like, why when it comes to politics do people get so crazy? Like there's this thing of like the stuff that I've seen over the past like few months, projected toward politicians, like this person should be hung, this person should be shot, this person should be tortured or whatever, all these different things, and it's across the board. It's not just one, it's different, people on the left or right or whatever. And it's like, wow, it's like these are people that are normally like just like, nice, loving, kind people. And all of a sudden this thing gets triggered. And I don't think they're aware of, this kind of, it's hatred. That's what I would call it. It's hatred that comes out, and like, hoping someone suffers, or hoping someone dies, or hoping someone is tortured, or this kind of a thing, And so it feels like, and it could be, this could also, people do this sometimes with celebrities, professional athletes, the guy that lost the game or something. But it's like, we're taking all the stuff that's in ourselves, I think a lot of times, and we don't want to kind of address it ourselves. So we project it onto somebody else. Not that the other person they probably have that in them too, but it's extra amplified because we want to just project it on the person and not acknowledge any of it in ourselves. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it's so much easier to see, the mind is so much clearer. For instance, my mind is so much clearer about like your life and what you should do than it is about my own. And that's because I think I'm the thinker, right? So I get lost in, again, like what seems to be the fabric of reality. And so my projections onto you can be so much clearer. And that's why in the work of Byron Katie, we most often judge someone else rather than, judging myself, at least to begin with, because the mind, is more willing to say, so let's say my friend in the living room, like she, was disrespectful to me. She, whatever the thing is, it's harder for me to see what my part was, or it'll move around, it'll get slippery, because the mind's job is to prove that what it believes is true. And its job is to stay identified because we've asked it to, we've asked through our belief, we've asked the mind to continue to show this voice in my head. That's me. Keep showing me that. That's true. So it fights for its life, And at the same time, what's so fascinating is the mind is a friend. and it doesn't have its own agenda or attachment. It uses my own, what I've told it to do. It uses the programming that I've given it, which is so fascinating. And actually the mind wants to know the truth, is what I found too. Like the mind, like once I find something that's true for me in inquiry, the mind will shift there with no problem, with so much ease. It's like, that's what it is. Okay, great. That's what we're going with now.
But I think what's really interesting about it's easy to judge someone else and project onto someone else and make it about someone else, because then I don't need to take responsibility for what I'm feeling or what I'm experiencing or what's happening in the content of my consciousness.
Yeah.
So, but the other side of that is then I can't break free of it or transcend it either. Yeah. So I find that's for me, that I think that's been a huge shift through my life and I think everybody that I know that's been on this path for a while, this is the shift that I would say most everybody makes, is for me the shift to taking responsibility for my thoughts, for my feelings, for my beliefs. Because then there's like an empowerment that comes from that and the ability to transcend it, where if I'm always blaming you for what I'm feeling, then I need you to change, but I can't make you change. But then I'm trying to control you to make you change. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think that takes us back into, the transition from question 3 to question 4 in the process.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So question 3 is what happens when the seed, lands and is planted. How do you react? What happens when you believe the thought? So often I want to hold on to the thought because I think that's what I am, right? And if it changes, it appears as though that's death.
Right.
Right? Yeah. If the thought is what I am, go of the thought, I'm done for. I'm gone. I will be obliterated, right? From the perspective of the ego, of the identity, that's what happens when the mind is questioned. And so then I can sit in the next question is, who would you be without the thought? So, and that's actually finding out. So again, I'm going to return to my living room. Who would I be? What is my presence like? Right? Like, let's use the seed metaphor again. Like the thought comes in and it doesn't get replaced with something else. It's just, what would happen if that thought came and just didn't have anywhere to land and just left? So the thought was, she's supposed to support me. Who would I be in that moment in my living room without that thought? So to actually touch in, who would I be without the thought? Immediately my breath returns, right? I'm breathing more deeply. I see myself in that moment as opposed to past, future, past, future, past, future. I see myself in my chair. I see her in her chair. There's just immediately so much more stillness. So much more resource is available to me. I hear my friend. She's angry. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole different situation, right? Like I'm present. I can be with her. And after step 4, then there's the opportunity to experience the opposite, which is the turnaround. So then I open my mind to, could it be that I was misjudging this situation? Could it be that the opposite may have been going on? So there's many ways to look at the opposite. So she was supposed to support me can become, I was supposed to support her.
Yeah.
Right? So in that situation, is that true? And then it's like, oh my gosh, Is that what I agreed to? I thought I agreed to something else. It could be maybe that I agreed to something else. Like, I don't know. Let me go back and check. And so then I look to see, does that feel true? And it's not about convincing myself. It's not about replacing one thought for another, but it's just being open to what was actually going on. So that's one possibility. I was supposed to support her. I was supposed to support me. That's another possibility in that situation. And how was I not supportive of me in my truth and my reality when I, put my expectations onto her and I didn't see her for who she really is. And then there's the direct opposite, which is she wasn't supposed to support me, which is like, wow, that could be true. I could go back and check, like, okay, before we sat down in the living room to do this thing, what did you think you agreed to? What do you remember? Just out of curiosity and out of wanting to know her and out of wanting to, like, work together more seamlessly in the future. Like, this is what I took away. Let me learn about you. It's like curiosity comes online, openness comes online, freedom really comes online. Like, my awareness can go anywhere. I'm safe. The way Katie says it is, the worst that can happen is what I'm thinking and believing. Which can be pretty radical. It is pretty radical, like, considering, let's say all of the terrible things that are going on and that seem to be going on in the world. And could it be that those situations, those experiences are here to wake us up to our true nature, and could it be that those are actually a dream, pointing us back to connection with our Creator? Yeah.
It could.
It could. I'm open. I'm still, 13 years in, testing that out.
Yeah. Just, I just think it's fascinating, the assumptions and labels that we're looking a lot here, like interpersonal, interrelational stuff, the assumptions and labels that we put on people, and then how, not that it's bad or good, but how then there's this whole series of assumptions. They may be agreements, but a lot of times they're assumptions. I think that's what I was getting at earlier. It's different. So, like, there's the agreement of, like, we're going to meet at 10 a.m. and then someone doesn't do it, and then we need to talk about what happened there, what's going on. But there's also this thing of, like, I was feeling, couldn't you tell I was feeling sad this morning? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you do something? Because we didn't agree to that. I'm making an assumption that and I'm mad at you because you didn't support me.
Right.
So there's these kind of assumptions that we start running. The other person may not even be in that same, they may be thinking about the same thing at all, but we have these assumptions that are there. So it's almost like there's, like, these layers of, there's these deeper rooted beliefs, and then there's, like, I was thinking about what you're saying about, kind of the collective. Like, I could have a belief that just this is a miserable world. And then I'm feeling a lot of sadness and a lot of anger about the world, and a lot, just kind of in this whole thing. And I'm so convinced that it's a miserable world, without questioning, is that reality?
Right.
I may have experienced some things that are very painful, and I may have seen things that are very painful, but does that mean it's a miserable world?
Right. Well, and when something is believed, right? So we talked about this before. When a thought is believed that opposes reality, I'm going to feel that, right? And often So let's take It's a Miserable World. Often what I feel, I take then to be proof that it's a miserable world, right? Rather than an indicator that I'm believing something. You know, so we look to our feelings often as proof. You know, well, how do I know it's a miserable world? God, I feel like shit.
Yeah.
I feel it. As soon as I believe it's a miserable world, I don't want to get up. You know, I want to stay in bed. I'm angry. People piss me off. You know, like, and then it's you know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
It becomes, I'm looking to prove that. And mine does a great job. Mine does a great job at proving it. But, you know, like I have a friend who facilitates this process. And one of the things that he likes to point to, which has been very helpful to me, is like, we look to our feelings as proof. But here's an easy like example that can help us sort of, you know, take that apart. So think of a time when, you know, you were running late to something, you know, and you had that feeling of like, I'm late, you know, and it's so true. And I'm going to show up and I'm going to be late and everybody's going to be there and they're going to look at me, you know, and it feels so true, right? It feels as though the feeling is my proof. And then actually you pull up and you walk in and you're 2 minutes early, you know, nobody's even there yet. Right. But so it seemed true. The feelings were giving you the proof. I'm late, you know, this light won't change colors. This person in front of me, you know, like, but then you actually pull up and I'm not late. So it's like, you know, just finding those little windows into like, oh, right. Like that helps me see it's possible my feelings aren't proof.
Okay. Now for a meta question.
Yeah.
Are there any thoughts that are true?
So no, in my experience, no.
Right.
So and what I mean by that is the thought itself isn't reality ever. Right. And so, you know, that takes us to the beginning of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. As soon as I call a tree, I've tried to capture it, you know, I've limited its nature, you know, and so we can say, so, you know, look out the window, is that a tree? On one level, yes, that's what we call those things, you know, those beautiful living beings. But is that what it is? No, the thought itself will never point us back to reality.
So that realization, it feels like I'm feeling into it right now. It's like, I feel so humble, you know, because I think that I know so many things and these people don't know what they're talking about. And I have the right position, they have the wrong position. So like realizing that there's no thought that's true, I feel like humble. I feel like kind of like a sense of like more relaxed, not as tense, more easy and more open, more open to listen, more open to be curious,
right,
be interested. So it feels like that creates this whole other possibility for how we can relate to each other.
Absolutely.
What's interesting in that though too is there can be this thing of like, so let's explore this. So there can be this thing of like, people have this awakening or opening. And I think I've kind of been through various stages of this myself, where it's like, how is it possible to recognize that no thought is true and still have a position on something? Do you get what I'm pointing at?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I experienced that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like, but you're kind of holding both at the same time. So there's a different, you're holding it in a different way than you would if that's all that was your whole reality. If you were attached and
Right.
identified to it.
Right. Well, okay. So here's a metaphor that's helpful to me sometimes because, talking about this stuff can be so slippery and like, what are we even
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah.
So if we use physics as an example, or like, I don't know if I used the right term, like quantum physics, or like if you start looking at what is all this made of, like let's say this card, what is this made of? I want to like understand. And we start looking at the particles, and then you get a powerful microscope and you like zoom in. Oh, and it's like, oh, it's actually made of only a few tiny things and mostly there's space. Well, okay, so let me zoom into that tiny thing. What is that made of? And I zoom into that and like, oh, that's actually only made of like this energy and then like mostly space. Okay, well then let me zoom into that. Oh, well that's, the more we understand about reality in from the science perspective, it's like it's not things. We're not looking at things. We're not interacting with things. We're actually interacting with space and energy.
A
And
wave, not a
to me,
particle.
it's and to me, the exactly. And we have the option to see it as a particle, and that's free will.
Yeah.
And it's the same, like I have the option to appear as though I'm an I, as though I'm a separate self. I'm BJ, I'm over here. And that's I have that freedom. I can do that. And it can be exciting to do that. I love the drama. I love the, like I get to dress up and like decorate this self. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's also, so thoughts appear to be things as well. Right. Like they sort of like in this metaphor, they're substance. But then in reality, what's going on when I disidentify with thinking, what's there is awareness. And so awareness actually is a whole different paradigm of operating from awareness. And awareness can hold a position. In my experience, it's like, I'm aware that I'm on in this conversation right now. Like let's say my son comes to the door and like wants my time, or wants my attention right now. I can be like, I'm in an awareness that I'm on this call with you right now, and I'm not going to, engage with you. I can make a choice and have a preference, through awareness rather than through identity, which is limited and based in past and future, which is illusion.
Yeah, and it's almost like from this awakened consciousness, like the position is arising spontaneously. I think that's how it kind of feels. It's like, I don't even know why this is what I feel, but this is what's coming through in this moment,
Right.
So then there's not this kind of like resentment and anger, or there's not this kind of energy around it that's battling anybody.
Exactly.
Just,
and it's because I'm open, right?
Yeah.
I'm open for him to come to the door. I'm open to give him a no, or to give him a yes if I find that, like if it was like something I needed to take care of, I'm open to saying, Brian, I need to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about it on more of a kind of a social level too, with different kind of issues that, people take positions on one side or the other. Like, first of all, the first illusion is there's two sides. It's like, no, there's like a million different sides. It's not like there's just two ways of looking at something. So it's like, which side are you on, but there can be like, here's an example. So, here's what I'd say was one position for me. I feel like freedom of speech is important to me. So, when I see like people getting censored on social media, just, for an opinion that's not the whatever the kind of mainstream narrative, or it's not a common way of looking at things, and they're getting censored or they're getting removed from social media. There's something in me that doesn't like that. And there's a feeling of like, I think it's better to have freedom of speech and everyone to be able to express their perspectives and their angles. And if someone disagrees with that, they can have a conversation about it and explore the different angles and stuff. So then it's like, I like to go like can I see the other side of it too? And it's like, yeah, I can see their side. Like, people want people to feel safe. They don't want them getting information that they feel could hurt them or make them do something that's irresponsible or something. So I can see that side. And I still think my side, I like my side, my side better. But I think if we just could have conversations that's more like, this is what I'm noticing is my position, if we want to call it that word, but this is what comes up for me in regards to this topic, and here's how I'm looking at this topic. And if we don't have, because I think what's happening right now, I see so much is like, this is my team and we all think this way about all these topics. And this is, these are the bad guys and they're the enemy and they all think this way. And then which side are you on, kind of feeling into, are you on our team or are you on the other team? So as opposed to like, I'm not getting any identification through this position on this. I'm not getting any sense of who I am. In fact, I'm totally open to looking at it a different way tomorrow. If I can see more information or I can gather something that looks different, I'm open to looking at it different or expanding my perspective on it. Yeah. That feels like, so like talking through that, it's like, well, yeah, if we could like, go more into the work like this and kind of liberate ourselves more from the attachment to ideas and beliefs as being kind of a validation for who we are, right? Then we could be able to communicate about things on a whole different level and really kind of explore what's the best way forward, for us. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And what can also be so juicy about stepping into those conversations is, again, like if I take them as a pathway to my freedom, if I, like for instance, a few years ago in my car, I would regularly listen to a Christian radio station that there was a lot that resonated for me. There was a lot that felt like care and love and uplifting. Yeah. And there was a lot also that felt like obligation and programming and things that I felt resistance to in my system. Yeah. And I would listen to that station. And then because I was proactively interested in showing myself what I resist. Mm-hmm. Because then again, that would bring me to more freedom, and take me into the lap of the Divine Mother and like, oh, like this Christian radio station is here for me. Like this, it's good. And just sort of, on one end of the sort of philosophy perspective, I think, that we are in a moment of a lot of polarization, and seeming separation, because this is a moment of transformation of consciousness. And that's what I experience in myself. Like when a piece of my identity is ready to shift, it shows up more in my awareness. It shows up more. And then I'm able to sit with it and I love you, I welcome you, you're free to be here. And then it automatically on its own can dissolve and collapse,
so you're
because
saying like
then
things are coming to the surface right now in order to be released. Is that kind of what could be let go?
That's an option. Yeah. Or to be held on to, like that's an option too.
But when things come up, like, it's kind of like they come up into your awareness. And it's like, oh, now I didn't even know that was in me before. Because I was thinking about that before, is like, are things getting worse, or are there things that have always been there that are now coming into awareness? Kind of what you're saying, coming into awareness to be dealt with in some way.
Yeah. So on a less sort of esoteric note, I think one of the factors of what's going on the planet right now is we're finding out what's going on through social media, which, has never been you know, what's happened before. Like you find out from your neighbor who may or may not agree with you. You find out from the newspaper. You know, you can choose which newspaper you subscribe to, but there's still like, there's an awareness of like, which newspaper am I reading kind of thing. And I think from my perspective, there's a lot of filtering that goes on through social media that we become blind to. You know, like let's say, for instance, you and I have exactly the same friends on Facebook. You know, let's say we're both friends with 3,000 people and it's the exact same people. So I would assume I'm seeing the same things pop up on my thing that you're seeing. But that's not necessarily the case, because it starts to filter. It sees which things I like, or, you know.
Yeah.
So I think there's actually a lot going on that that these tools that we use start to filter, you know. And I think, you know, oh, whatever information I have about Biden, whatever information I have about Trump is the same that you have, you know. So then I'm like, well, obviously you should think the way that I think. Didn't you read that thing? And no, you didn't. No. Because you're not seeing the same.
You read the other thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. A couple points on that. Like, I totally agree with that. And the first thing is that we're also filtering ourselves. So this is a big thing that's happening now, where it's like, you know, oh, this person said something I didn't like, I unfriended them, I blocked them. You know, I personally don't do that. Like, I want to have a little bit of a diversity of perspectives. I don't want or need anybody to think exactly like I do to love them or feel connected. I actually find it interesting if there's some, you know, variation of way people are looking at things or seeing things. So that's one thing I noticed is like, you know, unfriending, blocking, you know, this whole thing of like, there's like, if you're my neighbor, I can't just block you or delete you. I have to figure out how to get along with you. You know,
but now or build a high fence or
right. But now we just block people or unfriend people, and it's like everybody, it's the connections. I'm not saying everyone's like this, but the connections are being based on attachment to the same beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to something deeper than that. So that's one thing that's interesting. And then the other thing, and I feel like you and I I love the Christian radio thing. I feel like you and I are similar in this, like, cause like from our conversations, like we'll both like to sometimes intentionally go into an environment that's like very different to what we're used to, or what we're kind of like been conditioned to, just to see what happens, what opens up, or what's kind of, you know, what does that bring out in us, or how do these people look at things, or how do they see things, or what's going on there. And I really would invite everybody listening now more than ever to make space to do that, because we're getting kind of locked in our own, you know, kind of polarized world that's cut off from the rest of the world. And so, but you can intentionally, you know, listen to whatever the opposite radio station, what you normally listen to, or listen to, you know, go to the opposite side of town that you're normally in and see what's happening. So you do these kind of, they're like experiments or like exercises, and you just expand your consciousness through that process. And there's a reason. This is one thing I've realized in my life. There's a reason everybody is doing what they're doing. Like either it has been working for them or it is working for them currently, but there's a reason. And if you kind of spend time and get to know these different kinds of people, you'll find, even if you don't agree with it or it's not for you, you start to understand where people are coming from, and it opens up more of a sense of compassion and connection to this other reflection of yourself who's doing things differently.
And again, one of the things that Katie says that's so poignant to me, is if I believed what they believed, I would make the same choices that they're making.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that.
And the more that I understand belief in myself, like it's so challenging to separate myself. It can be so like such a process and a practice to separate who I am from what it is that I believe, right? So the compassion really can turn on. That's like, yeah, it seems as though this person is really lost in that belief. And like, what is it that I think they're guilty of? In the end, they're guilty of believing their thoughts. And gosh, do I know how challenging it can be to question my thinking, because it seems as though I'm going to die when I think that, when I think that thought is what I am.
That's another interesting criticism I've heard from some people about Byron Katie, who I think don't fully understand the work, is that it lacks compassion, or it lacks some kind of empathy. But I think if you take it to its depths, it's actually, you're actually seeing how, how that person, right, is actually like what you just said, like if you had their beliefs, you would be who they are. And in the deepest sense, it's like you actually are who they are, So it's kind of the deepest level of compassion that's deeper than a belief of compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I have a question for you. Actually, I've been wanting to ask you for a really long time. And it's about, you're like, oh, where's this going to go? No, it's about law of one. And
I'm excited.
I always wondered, like, do those two go together? I'm getting a thing that my internet is unstable. I think we're okay though. Do those two go together? Law of one and Byron Katie? Obviously, there's a sense that they do, because you're resonant in both of them. But I want to inquire into that, because it seems like on one level, like law of one has a lot of beliefs and a lot of stories and a lot of like ideas. And it feels like the work of Byron Katie is about not having beliefs. So that's my question to you is like, how do you feel into those two things?
Yeah. So, do you think the people who are watching the video will generally have a sense of the law of one?
So good point. Good point. That's a good point. That's a good point. That's a good time to point out that BJ's partner, Aaron, actually did a podcast with me about law of one.
Yes.
In the past, which everybody can look up. Like a year and a half
ago, maybe.
Everybody can look up, and we talk a lot about law of one. But for those who haven't listened to that podcast, I don't think we have to get into a whole big thing about it, but it's a channel teaching. Why don't you take it from there? It's a channel teaching that I know has been inspiring to a lot of people, and I've found some inspiration in it myself. And it talks about the universe, and go ahead. You share what.
Yeah. So the shorthand for me is it's a channeled teaching on the spiritual evolution of humankind. And the scope is a lot broader than that too, in terms of what they talk about. And they call themselves Ra, a social memory complex known as Ra. And so they're basically like angelic beings. They don't exist. They don't live here on earth. They don't live in physical form. And they're a collective soul. And there's a lot that they talk about. They break down sort of a cosmology of oneness,
and maybe we can broaden this out more, of not just law of one, but any, let's say, like navigational tool that someone is using to try to make sense of the universe. Right. So like so it's like, it seems like there's a series of beliefs that's there. And how do you approach that from the work, and how do you come into alignment with that?
So from my perspective, I don't make it a story about beliefs. I don't make it that this is what Ra believes. I make it that this is Ra's direct experience, or their direct experience of reality. And for myself, I notice that, I do question my own beliefs. I notice where I may or may not start to take in those words
Mm-hmm.
as belief, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which again, would if I, in as much as I take it as a belief, it steers me away from reality,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's such a paradox. Like I think we don't actually understand what belief is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, if something's true, I should believe it. And in reality, believing something actually steers me away from the truth of it,
Mm-hmm.
which is so fascinating. So I notice in myself when I start to believe sometimes what Ra's saying, and I notice some sort of stickiness or resistance to something else, you know, like someone will say something and I'll be like, no, Ross is the opposite, you know, I'm like, oh gosh, I made a belief about that. And like question that, you know, like,
yeah,
where am I resisting, you know, and being closed to, rather than holding this possibility as an awareness. But then, so speaking to the parallel between the work of Byron Katie and Ra's, what Ra offers. So one of the central teachings that they offer is they call the balancing exercises. And they say out of everything that they offered is the most directly applicable to human life. Like there's a lot of just information of like, you know, the history of humans on Earth, or there's a lot of just informational. But then there's also the teachings on here's what you can do. And that's called the balancing exercises. And for me, it's really parallel to the work, and hard to crack. It's really hard to crack in Ra's telling, which makes sense because they're not incarnate on Earth. They're not, you know, they don't have these human bodies. It's hard to like, wait, what did you say, Ra? But with me having, you know, so many years of experience of deep self-inquiry meditation, I find so much parallel and overlap between what I hear them say and my experience of the balancing exercises. You know, they talk about being able to find the opposite of what you believe, and being able to find love in the moment, you know, when it may have seemed as though there wasn't love there. And that is so exactly what I experience with the work. So I feel a lot of congruency for sure.
I think it's interesting what you're saying about listening to an experience without translating it into a belief. That feels like the key to me to what you said. So I'm also like looking at it in terms of like Christianity, where, you know, perhaps Jesus was communicating his experiences or his experience, and perhaps it was made into a belief by some people, and then the experience sort of lost in the belief. And then we get into duality and separation and divisiveness and all these things. So that's an interesting thing, how that can happen with anything where there's some sort of transmission or some sort of channeling of a deep truth from an awakened consciousness. And someone can get caught into beliefs about it, make it into belief and get into a mental space and lose the aliveness of that transmission.
Yeah. Well, and from my perspective, it's really helpful to be aware of that and to not make that wrong, you know, because I think that's so much of what the human experience is here for. I am here to appear as though I'm a separate self. And then I also have the option, while I'm appearing as a separate self, to see through that, you know, wake up from the dream while I'm in the dream. And I just find that it's really helpful to not make, you know, the ego wrong, because it's part of the game. It's just part of the friendly universe that was set up for us, and like we can find out why and how that's good. You know.
Well, what's so amazing, I think the whole intention to me is, can we wake up as the oneness in the duality, in the oh, there's BJ over there, there's Brian over here. Now we can have so much fun playing together.
Absolutely.
Knowing that
it becomes abundant.
Knowing that we're the exact same essence.
Yeah, I know. It becomes abundance. Like it becomes, rather than separation, it's like, oh my gosh, not only is there a me, but there's a you, and there's
Exactly.
tea, and there's a tree
Exactly.
out there,
That's
and I
it.
have a pillow, and
Yeah.
oh my gosh, the list goes on. There's a bird out my window. Like,
Yeah.
it's all grace. It
Yeah.
just is all exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like if there was 8 billion Brians, that'd be like really boring, you know, but if there's like, everybody's a different face and color and, you know, personality, and that can
Right.
be, it can be
Exactly.
a really beautiful world to play in, while recognizing at the same time, everyone's at the same essence, you know, and then of
Yeah.
course, like the question is like, how do we, I don't even like to say maintain, or because I think there's something even illusionary about that, but like how do we
Yeah.
be in that conscious awareness, and you know,
Right.
these tools and tips that you're giving us are, as you said, they're the how.
Yeah.
So let me just ask how this is, have you noticed as you've gone through the work, have you noticed changes in your life and shifts in your life? And then we'll
Yeah.
talk about the course that you're offering then as well.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% changes in my life. I think I've always, as long as I can remember, I've lived with the blessing of an open heart, and an open mind. Like I just somehow came in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this is the cultivation of that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this is the cultivation of myself. And it's, yeah, I mean, it's just, my experience is it's a way of falling in love with myself, and then through that falling in love with everything, which has always been my heart's desire, you know, to find the yes and the goodness of everything. And I've looked, you know, under so many stones and around so many corners of like, how do I do this, you know, and practicing in BC, and you know, there's so many good tools, you know, I don't think this is the only one. This one works for me really well. But yeah, it's, you know, again, it's one of those paradoxes. This practice supports me in becoming more of who I already am. and removing the barriers, any barriers from that would keep me from being the gift and the blessing that I am.
Doesn't Byron Katie have a book called, if it's not, it's called either this or very similar to this, Loving What Is?
Yeah, that's it.
Loving What Is, yeah. That kind of sums it up, right?
Yeah.
And I think where people can get caught up in that is, and we kind of touched on it already, but it doesn't mean that you're like trying to be happy, or you're trying to like, you know, make this impression of like, oh, I just love everything no matter what. It's, love includes embracing sadness if you have sadness, or if there is anger arising, you know, embracing that, and or fear, or whatever we think is like dark or shadow or negative or bad, you know, it's like embracing whatever is. Like a simple way I like to say it is an unconditional relationship with the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just really being able to be with what is, and then in that there's a loving what is, but not the love the way it's, that word is sometimes used. It's like this deeper, the deepest, really, the deepest level of love.
Yeah, it's a love that isn't personal. You know, that's like that's not what I'm doing. I'm not doing the love. I'm not loving Brian or loving this moment. It just is the unfolding, the blossoming of the heart that's just like delicious and exquisite.
Love that. I love that. And then I love this like, it's a paradox to me because I totally love that. And then I love coming together with people that are on this path as well. There feels something like there's something valuable about that, or something that's important about that, which is a good segue to your course.
Yes, that is a good segue to my course. Yeah. Okay. So I'm launching an online program, a year-long journey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So a lot of people who experience the work it feels as though there's like a barrier to getting in. You know, it's like there's a lot to grok. There's a lot to sit with. And it's very helpful to have a facilitator, and who am I going to find to facilitate me? And so my attempt for this in creating this program is to remove a lot of those barriers. So signing up for the course, you have a monthly partner who's going to facilitate you, you know, and you're going to facilitate them. You have a home team.
When you say facilitate, like, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So that means like read the questions on the card, you know. So
so if I have something come up, like if I'm, you know, having some kind of relational conflict, or just whatever, something's arising for me, that if you're facilitating with me, you would help me through the questions and help me work through it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I would help provide the container and the space for the inquiry.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean I'm trying to fix you. It
right.
just means I'm here, I'm listening.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're done answering question 1, I ask you question 2.
Mm-hmm.
When you're done, you know, then I ask you question 3.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's having a sacred witness and having
mm-hmm.
accountability partner. So monthly inquiry partner. There's also a small group cohort, that your home team that you'll stay with throughout the year, and have twice monthly check-ins. And so that's a way of like, developing closer relationships with a few people. So that's going to be, I haven't decided quite yet, but somewhere between 3 and 5 people in the home team. So we can track each other, and we can, how's it going for you? How's this month? What are your challenges? And then there's twice monthly optional group support calls. So then I'll be on the call, and people can bring their questions, or I can facilitate people, and I can also, having more experience on the journey perhaps than some people, although that's not necessary. Any level of experience in the work is welcome. But if people have questions or want to be facilitated, that can happen on the group support calls. We're also going to have an online platform on Slack, so everybody can stay in touch. And Slack is it's similar to email, or it's like a cross between emails and chat rooms, and it's a way for all the participants to be in touch and share the journey in that way, and then also to receive the content. And so it's the year-long journey is also going to run parallel to the book that you mentioned, Loving What Is. And so there's an optional book study. People can read the book along with along every month. So people who are reading the book, there's like assigned chapters for this month, and it parallels a monthly theme. So I'm also creating a theme for every month, like an invitation. If you don't know where to put your focus on your inquiry, well, this month you're welcome to put it onto, your family of origin. If that's interesting.
There's a lot to work on there for most people.
Yeah. Or like then the next month, you can look at money and career, or the next month, it just sort of like hits all of these places where there's juicy little pockets probably for all of us to look at. So there's a lot of pieces to it, and a lot of them are optional. So people can, take on, this much for the year, or take on this much, or,
That's awesome. How do people register? How do they get more information?
Yeah. So there's a couple places that it's listed. One is my personal website, which is stepintotruth.com, stepintotruth.com. It's listed under events.
That's a good domain. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Too. And the program is called Abiding in the Heart. And it also is listed on, they have an announcement that you might be excited about, Brian. Today is the first day that we have launched our new website for the Temple of the Open Heart.
I was going to ask you about that too, actually.
Yeah. So this program, Abiding in the Heart, is a collaboration between Step Into Truth, which is my platform for sharing the work, and the Temple of the Open Heart, which is really an unfolding of this, the Law of One study group that's been taking place for many years and has catalyzed so much in our community. So we've formed a nonprofit church that is called the Temple of the Open Heart. And our intention is to build a physical temple at some point in the future, some point in the next few years. And for now, there's a lot that exists as the temple without there being a physical space. And so this is the first collaboration between Step Into Truth and the temple. So the program is also listed on the temple website, which is Toto, Totoh, Temple of the Open Heart, toto.org. And it's listed under offerings on that website.
Sweet. Yeah. And you have like a community coming together. How many people are there now in living in?
Yeah. Oh, I just remembered, you're on the website. You're in one of the pictures from, I'm pretty sure.
So then everybody really should go to the website now.
Go see Ryan's lovely face.
See my lovely face on the website. No, but you have like, let's see, you have maybe like 10 or 12 people maybe in community coming together now out where you're living.
So we have various containers. Where we're living now, yeah, is about a dozen people.
Mm-hmm.
There's 4 houses. Yeah, and some adults and some children, about a dozen of us. And then there's a lot of different projects that happen here on the land. They're all listed on the temple website. We have a cooperative homeschool that we just started where we host study group. We have regular Harmony Council. I don't know whether you even know about Harmony Council.
I think I do.
Yeah. So that's a way of proactively coming into conversation with one another and working on our relationships, as well as means of repair. So if something happens, the Harmony Council has many ways to support relationships finding repair. So Harmony Council, study group, I don't know, there's more. There's a lot that we're
the temple is the idea for the temple is like a non-denominational space, right?
Yeah.
And
we call it open source spirituality.
Nice. Open
so
source
it's like
spirituality.
So I mean, it's basically for those of us on some sort of mystical path, looking to find our direct experience of, goodness, rather than someone telling me about it. Right. And it's great to have someone tell me about it too, for instance, Ra. But that there's also, through meditation or through, so many different ways of healing ourselves, healing and untraumatizing our nervous systems. There's so many ways of actually touching into the goodness directly. Yeah.
And there's so much so much that we can grow and evolve and learn through coming together in community. And I still feel like I think the Zoom stuff and everything has opened some doors that aren't there before, which is really good. But there is still something like irreplaceable about coming together in person that feels really, it's almost like there's like a vibrational resonant frequency that you can attune to. It's like in the body, and you can attune to when I think there's, is it called heart math, right? Where they study the electromagnetic frequency of the heart. And when you're in a certain space together, there's an attunement that happens. Actually, I think you can be at a distance too. But anyway, there's an attunement that happens between our hearts and the physiology of our bodies. That's pretty special.
So, and then here's a little plug for checking out the Law of One, the Ra material. In our study group on Sunday, Ra was specifically talking about that, about the way that, there is this truth, right? That we're all one.
Yeah.
And then there's this apparent separation. And we take these, seemingly separate bodies. And for humans in particular, we have these sort of tender, defenseless bodies. We don't have so much hair as bears, and we don't have, we don't have these ways to protect ourselves.
Claws and so forth.
Yeah. And that's specifically part of the program, so that we have to come together to work things out, and that there also is this sort of like loneliness, is the way that Ra puts it, loneliness of the physical body. Like the body craves touch and companionship. And and it's part of the program that makes it so that we come together and we work these things out, because in relationship is where these stories come up so often, the I and the opposition, and I want to work that out so that I can be in relationship with you. Yeah.
I think we're complete. Anything else you want to share?
I mean, obviously I could keep talking.
You could.
I'm excited to talk. No, that's great.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being here. I'm glad we made it happen, and I always love our time together to share. And
thank you.
I'll put the link when we put this out. I'll have the links for the websites that you stated. And thanks to all of you for being here. And see you in the next now.